Howdy, friends and neighbors. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is August 24th, year 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And a quick welcome and howdy to Piper Fogel, ECAT, and Rita Phillips, ECAT again. Sorry for calling your name twice. Kathy Sue is in the chat. Thomas Madonis, share freedom. Two of my favorite words combined, share and freedom. I'm sorry, that joke's getting a little old. Tyrone Sargent, another two of my favorite words, Tyrone and Sargent. And the biomancers in the house. Okay, let me move on because I got a lot of material for you here. If you like mass murder, mayhem, conspiracy, hangings, intrigue, international relations, North Korea, dictatorships, World War II, vintage atrocities, all the way up to the current situation. That's why I'm talking about an event that took place back in 1995. I'm going to argue that what went down in the Tokyo subway system back in, I think it's been 21 years now or something like that, is relevant to what's happening in our world right now here in 2021. So you see that I describe this as a look into the so-called new religions. And by the way, that is a exploding area of study in the academic world, because truthfully, a lot of it was getting pretty stale, and I think it's valuable. But the only problem is that there's a huge gap in so-called new religious studies, new religious movement studies. It's more than a gap. It's so large you can drive a truck through it. And we're going to drive a truck. We're going to drive a four-wheel drive. We're going to drive an American-made, Toledo, Ohio-made Jeep right through that huge gap that's left for us. So their loss is our gain. We're going to be expounding on this so-called doomsday cult. And I say so-called because, yes, there were certain doomsday elements, apocalyptic, millenarian, if you will, elements to the Aum Shinrikyō's belief system, but it was far more than that, right? And all of us have gotten a lot smarter in the last 18 months. We know that there are many, many layers of analysis that need to be pulled back in even trying to understand the most simple phenomenon. And we've been through it so many times, the bombings and the different false flags and attacks going on. I won't even enumerate them, explosions, you name it, distractions. Very rarely are they organic. That is, very rarely are they just coming from a place that has not already been engineered or orchestrated. So I'm going to talk about the so-called doomsday cult. It's called Aum Shinrikyō. Sometimes I'll say Aum for short, just so you know. And it was the Aum people, the membership, and some of the patsies that were involved that were blamed by the government and the Japanese court system, as well as the international press, and I'll explain why that matters. It was they that were blamed for the deaths and the injuries, which were substantial, they're real, that were caused by this coordinated attack on this world-renowned Tokyo metropolitan subway system. And as you know, I like to put myself in the story. That is, I like to give a little bit of autobiographical glosses on some of the material I present. It happens, and I'm going to indulge myself if it's okay with you. I think it adds to the story, though. It's not just about me. It enhances what I'm about to tell you. But I was, as I told you before, I was a Fulbright scholar in Japan, Hiroshima University, back 1994 year. And I gave a talk on the bombing of Nagasaki in specific, and I was in Hiroshima, so I was in the ideal place to study this. And in my mind, okay, this is, who could top this, right? I mean, this takes the cake. But as I have since learned, These crises are regular, and they're intensifying right now as more and more people, such as you and me, have awakened to the fact that modern governments, I don't care which one you want to look at, modern governments, if they ever really did, but now it's becoming so obvious, modern governments are mostly about controlling and maybe even exterminating certain targeted groups within their society rather than governing, right? And of course, it's all been, at least when we were growing up back in the baby boom generation, we were presented an entirely different picture. And most of us, as I've already alluded to, have grown up to realize that that was mostly a myth and a cover story. So if you're at that point, well, congratulations. Some people have not really fully realized that, but that's okay. We'll let the dead bury the dead. They can take care of their own problems now because it's too late at this point. So I was there in '94, and then while I was back here in the U.S., I had resumed some teaching duties. This is right before I got my job at UC Davis, the academic year before. That was an incredible year because as I was getting reacclimated to life in the U.S. at this new teaching job, it's a huge load of teaching that they put on me there for them to save money and for me to be demoralized. This happens, the Aum Shinrikyō. I was just in Japan, and by that time I had been on the Tokyo subway system, which is one of the marvels of the world. Perhaps I haven't been to all the subway systems, but I've been to most of them on them. And Tokyo's got to be probably, I'd say, the best, by whatever. So I got really well acquainted to it. And then I hear this news, like everybody else, just shocking. This group led by this bearded, half-blind guru, supposedly, right? And of course, I'm growing up by 1995, and I have at least some sophistication that a lot of it's just bull, and it's been rewritten to fit a certain type of script. But nonetheless, I was shocked because I knew the subway system. I knew how elaborate it is, and as a person who's new to it, to Japan and the system, you're thinking about all kinds of odd scenarios. And one of the scenarios I had was, gee, what if all the openings were sealed off and the exits, and we were all trapped here, all millions of people, literally millions of people. Let me see, I have some information. Yeah, okay, here's some hard information. And you can understand why I had these thoughts. I'm sure I'm not the only one. The Tokyo subway system, by the way, in Japanese, it's chikatetsu. Chika means below, tetsu means iron. So it's like the underground railroad, right? But it's much more sophisticated than what I'm telling you. You have to experience it yourself. I hope you do get over there at some point and don't have to go through all the different hurdles that we're trying to overcome right now. Anyway, it has 8.7 million, the subway system has 8.7 million daily passengers, 8.7 million. And even then, according to this information, that's only a quarter of the Tokyo's 40 million, that's every day, rail passengers. That's why I say it's a marvel of not just engineering, but of organization, operations, research, all these different sciences and tunneling technology and retailing, because a lot of these stops, and stop doesn't really capture it. I mean, these are like nodes. Oftentimes these subway stops, as they're listed, end at a giant government building like Kosumigaseki, which was one of the main stops where the Aum Shinrikyō group supposedly hit with, and I say supposedly, and you'll understand why I'm saying supposedly and qualifying it, with sarin gas, right? It's a major one. And other stops will terminate right in a giant department store, which are also incredible marvels of Japanese life, at least in Tokyo. But, the major cities have a similar setup right there. So you have a huge number of people going in and out daily because it's the national business, economic, and government center, right, Tokyo. They all come in the morning, and then they all leave in the evening, and they repeat it again 5-6 days a week. So I said, "Wow, who would have imagined it?" I guess I was that naive. Who would imagine that some group or some individual, some entity would attack the Tokyo subway system? But sure enough, that caught everybody's attention. And that's part of the reason for the PSYOP. You're going to take notice if some group, especially if it's a cult, right? Because by this time, we had been through a number of cult sensations, right? There was, and I've given this in a talk previously on this channel. We talked about the Jonestown killing, right, in Guyana. This is back in November of 1978. And just a couple years prior to the Tokyo situation, we had the big shootout. I mean, it was televised, I think, like 24 hours a day for a couple of days, 3 days, quite a while. Maybe it was long, maybe it was about a week, but it seemed to just go on and on. And CNN was, still fairly much of a novelty, decided to get 24-hour news coverage. So they got a lot of free programming out of David Koresh and the Branch Davidian cult, again, a cult, right? And this is in Waco, Texas, 1993. I remember that one well. And shortly after Tokyo, we had the Order of the Temple, Solar Temple. This was in Belgium, in Switzerland, and in Canada. By the way, I also give a talk on the Solar Temple and this piece that I did on Grace Kelly, who at that time was Princess Grace of Monaco. She was an American movie star, if you didn't know, and hugely popular, a favorite of Alfred Hitchcock, the director. And then she got, married off to Prince Rainier of Monaco, and then apparently she was involved in this cult, this OTO cult, right? And then there was Heaven's Gate. I think that same year, the Heaven's Gate, this is down in San Diego, and there was 39 killed in a mass suicide. So, we're prying for these types of stories, and and one of the reasons why I'm giving this talk is I just want to put out the red flag. Don't be surprised if we see something like this happening right about now, because all the different elements, everything that's going on in the society and the culture, and in the business world, the economy, points to events such as this to draw attention and energy and focus, often to a different direction, right? But if we talk about these historically based events, such as the Aum Shinrikyō attack, hopefully we'll be prepared for what the bad guys have ready for us in waiting with their next script, right? Because these are all scripted out. But, as in any type of situation, you can't get all the details correct. Sometimes there are dropped lines or forgotten points, or someone didn't hit their mark, right? So script is always open, and that's for us to investigate what these gaps are and see where there's these contradictions that will shed some light on the situation. So on March 20th, 1995, you had the Aum Shinrikyō membership and some patsies, drivers and whatnot, unwitting, useful idiots, got onto the train. Some of them went into the station, and the story was that they had these packets of sarin nerve gas. I think it was developed during World War II or in the 1930s, right? You know the history about poisoners in chief and all that. I mean, this is an old technology, but these packets were dropped. The original story I heard, they were cans of like soft drinks. And if you've been to Japan, there's every few feet, it seems there's a vending machine with drinks in it, right? So it didn't look out of place, and someone put it down there, and they got these umbrellas, which are also in abundance because it rains a lot in Japan, even in the summertime. Not so much in summertime, but it rains a lot, so people are always carrying umbrellas. And then they hit the can or the packet, and the gas started to distribute, go through the entire tunnel in this confined space, right? Previous to that, and the authorities, the police department, the national police, as well as the local police authorities, knew that Aum Shinrikyō was a chief suspect in an attack on this town called Matsumoto in the year before. And it supposedly was a sarin gas attack. And I just supposedly because our friend, you heard me reference him in other types of stories, right? Yoichi Shimatsu. He has an entirely different take, which I'm going to get. So watch to the end because he has a completely different take than what you and I are used to hearing. And I myself have a contribution to this discussion, which I'll share with you at the end after I go through all the details here. So they were known. They were a known entity. And there were a couple of murders. Back in 1989, there was an attorney by the name of Sakamoto Tsutsumi. He was an attorney for the Aum victims' family. They were family members who hired this attorney to get back the loved ones, usually they were adult children, who had left families, dropped out of society, and left this community. They renounced the world and they joined the Aum Shinrikyō group, never to be heard from again. And of course, they're giving them money and whatnot. So he was murdered. A group, and this has been documented, a group broke into his apartment, this is the attorney, and killed the attorney Sakamoto and his wife and his child when they broke in. This is back in 89. So again, I'm trying to establish that the government had already kind of a pattern that was evolved, yet they let this guy and his group run free. And the reason I'm telling you this, I don't want to give it away. I want to build a suspense. The reason will become evident. By the way, I'll cut to the chase where it comes to Russia. Aum Shinrikyō had more members in Russia, or back then the Soviet Union, than it did in Japan. And it wasn't only until 2016, in spite of this 1995 terror attack and the years-long trials. Trials are really long in Japan, criminal trials. And they almost always end in conviction, by the way. They have like something like a 98% conviction rate. And if you're convicted of a heinous crime such as this, the Japanese court system, the justice system, does it the old-fashioned way. You'll be hanged. You'll be hanged until dead. And no lethal injections, no gassing. You'll be hanged. You'll be hanged with a rope. You're going to be dangling there until dead. And by the way, the people, skipping ahead a little bit, not only Asahara Shoko, who is the head of the group, his real name is Matsumoto Chizio, but he was known in the cult as the leader, Asahara. He was executed along with his co-conspirators back in 2018, I think it was, not that long ago. It took them the court system that long to get all the information, build an airtight case, and then mete out the penalty, which was death by hanging, right? So this is at rush hour. This is around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. And Japanese corporate time, this was surprising to me. They don't really start working. What I thought they'd be working at be at their desks at 7 o'clock. They're still on the subways coming from the suburbs. I guess it takes, an hour, 2 hours perhaps to come in. So they don't get into work until about 9 or 9:30, which is kind of late by American corporate standards. However, they stay later and then they work on Saturdays. And I won't go into the whole Japan corporate culture. That's a whole study into itself. But anyway, it was rush hour, so they knew these people who carried out the attack what to expect here. Rather than going through reviewing the circumstances here, because you can read that on your own, let me just tell you a little bit about the profile of some of the membership. And as back in 95, as the news came out, I was astounded to learn that the principal perpetrators of this crime and the planners of it were elite they're part of the educated elite, and some of them were part of the corporate elite. I don't think there were any bankers involved, but let me just give you an example here. There's one guy, I think he was one of the people that were executed a few years ago. His name's Hayashi Ikuo. And just to give you an idea, prior to joining Aum, it says, I'm reading here from an article, I think it's called Biowarfare website. I can't remember. It's a really good website. Hayashi, it says, was a senior medical doctor, MD, with an active frontline track record at the Ministry of Science. So he was a government worker, National Government, Ministry of Science and Technology. That's a prestige institute, but he left it. He left it to join Aum Shinrikyō. Okay. And his father was a medical doctor. Hayashi graduated from Keio University, which is one of the elite private school, one of the top schools in the country, and it's in Tokyo too. And he was a heart and artery specialist at Keio Hospital, and top level credentials, right? But he was also a torture guy. Sound familiar? Have we heard of medical doctors in the past who are also sadists so far as torture techniques are concerned? Yes, I think we've heard that tune before, unfortunately. So he was an expert in sodium pentothal administration. He would do electric shocks and administer to the membership, right? Because it's the membership that are the ones that are held most suspect, especially when they begin to doubt the story and their loyalty begins to waver a bit, or even when they defect. That's when they're really in trouble. And by the way, that's the scenario that's going to happen to the people who are pulling this caper right now. The ones that begin to waver, hey man, you better waver really good. Or if you're even slightly doubtful, Dr. Hayashi, he's going to be on your tail. Okay, next one, another guy, Hirose, Kenichi Hirose, another elite educated individual from Waseda, another private institution based in Tokyo. Tokyo has tons of universities and colleges, private and national, right? You know about Tokyo University. It used to be the Imperial University. Now it's the top of the national universities. They compete with Kyoto University, Kyoto Daigaku, Tokyo Daigaku. They're like neck and neck. And that's where all the Unit 731 guys were. They're either from Tokyo Daigaku or Kyoto Daigaku. Daigaku means university, high learning, comes from Chinese characters. So he was from Waseda. He had a postgrad, I don't know if he's PhD, but he had a graduate degree in physics from Waseda. And he was also a government bureaucrat. He was in the chemical brigade from the Japanese Ministry of Science and Technology, just like Hayashi was. Only Hayashi was a medical doctor. This guy was a guy in physics, Hirose. Another guy named Toyoda, not Toyota, but Toyoda Toru. He's from the University of Tokyo, elite of the elite, right? Yeah, you have to make it in there in a highly competitive examination. It's so competitive that some of the people who are disappointed, will go so far as to kill them. So I don't know why I think that's amusing, but they will, go crazy. And he's got a master's degree. He did a little PhD again, he comes from the Ministry of Science and Technology. So do you see a pattern develop? These guys came out of government, right? And all of a sudden they become these wild-eyed cult members, right? So I think you know where I'm going with this, right? I think you're smart enough to figure out, just like, I did quite a while ago, that this idea that there's this crazy cult, Aum Shinrikyō here, and there's the government ministries over here, and then never the twain shall meet, is a artificial story. It's a bogus story. They never really left the ministry, and Aum Shinrikyō itself is a deep state arm of this constellation of interests. And we'll get into Shimatsu no Momochi to kind of flesh out all the different players that are involved. Some of them will surprise you, including North Korea, Soviet Union / Russia, and even China, and South Korea too. We'll get to that. And I think that's important for today's story. We hear about is the the China, the Wuhan virus, the China virus. But I think we're missing some important elements. We're missing the North Korean involvement. We're missing, well, we know about Japan involvement through Kawaoka, who left Wisconsin and is back in Tokyo, right? I don't know if it's University of Tokyo, but he's back in Japan. And you know about 731, so we have that covered. But I think there's a South Korean connection. And George Webb, the great investigative journalist, George Webb, has talked numerous times about Shincheonji. And they come, and as you know, if you've been following it closely enough, his reportage, Shincheonji comes from the Unification Church, which was led by Moon, Reverend Moon, who I've been looking at forever. I used to have lectures on him in my class, and the Korean American students really didn't appreciate that. Plus they were given all this propaganda that Japanese Americans are the source of their hardship, whereas in fact Korea and Japan have worked together since 1910. I think they staged these fake fights between each other, like we hate Japan, we hate China, but the leadership the top level leadership has always been aligned with each other, and including capers like this, operations like this. Again, does that sound familiar? Yeah, I think it does. Just like we were told, yeah, we defeated the Germans and Nazis during World War II, and now we know, almost everybody knows that those, there's a Fourth International, as Jim Marrs referred to it in a very cogent title that kind of sums it up, but the subtleties, right? So we know that it's not just a matter of black and white. There's the good guys and there's the bad guys. We know that the elite operate on a much more nuanced fashion. And I think over the last 18 months, many Americans have realized that. I think that's one of the positive learning takeaways for at least the educated population, or the non-educated. I don't want to discriminate. I just say educated because there is empirical information. There are reports that document that the higher level of education you have, the less likely you're going to submit to, I'm not going to say it, but you can fill in the blanks. Why? Because they've figured it out. They're studying. They're watching Neighborhood News Group. They've been watching George pound the pavement for 5 years and seeing how all the different components fit together. And there are other reporters as well. I'm just speaking to our immediate reference group here. But Yoichi Shimatsu has made similar conclusions, coming from different directions, coming up with similar. That's a really compelling argument when people who are following different trails arrive at the same destination independently of each other. It tells me that the working hypothesis is very strong. It's probably beyond theory. It's almost proof, right? Okay, so you get the idea. There, one more guy. His name's Hayashi Yasuo. He was 37 years old. These are mostly men. But the membership was like 50-50 women and men. But the top level leadership were mostly medical, physics, physical science, your STEM type people, science, technology, engineering. They didn't have anybody there who was a Buddhist mystic except for Asahara Shoko, the head guy. These are all guys who are into the technocracy, right? So anyway, Hayashi studied AI, artificial intelligence, at Kogakuen University. He had been to India. He studied yoga. But anyway, these are just some of the characters there. You get an idea that this group of perpetrators were from an elite appointed stratum of society, just like the ones who are pulling the capers here that we're enduring here in the U.S. and around the world come from an elite stratum of society. Just look at their curriculum vitae. You got, Dr. Anthony Fauci from, Cornell, and all the way down the line, all, the attorneys and even the elective officials and the cover-up artists. They come from all these elite institutions, right? And they're part of a very similar network, sometimes multi-generationally similar networks. Some are newbies, some are servitors of empire. They their parents are like FOBs, fresh off the boat, and so they want to make their mark. And yeah, I wrote the book on that one, right? So let me move here to back to this whole idea of the NRM, the new religious movements. It's so prevalent now at the university curriculum that they're called NRMs. And the reason I mention this is because the people who are putting these false stories, and I don't say false because they're necessarily purposely putting these false stories together. I'm just saying they're false because a half-truth is still a falsity, right? I use the example of Grant's tomb. Yeah, answer the question. Who is buried in Grant's tomb? If you say Ulysses S. Grant, you're correct. But you're not saying that Mrs. Ulysses S. Grant is also buried in Grant's tomb. So these people are missing a body, right? And who are they? They're academic types. They come from sociology, this is what I've been able to find: sociology, political science, and psychology. So they just love all this cult activity. It's going to get papers. They're going to be able to go to conferences and deliver all these great talks and write all these books that lead nowhere and just mislead us. And it's also a cool topic, and you're going to get undergraduates in there who are going to be hanging on your every word because you want to know about what went down with the Branch Davidian at Waco. You want to learn about Charles Manson and the Night Stalker, right? Or the Black Dahlia. So these guys can indulge their own fantasies of fame and notoriety, but also being able to walk the line of legitimate, academic inquiry. So here's the probably the best example that I've seen of this pattern. It's called it's Routledge. It's an academic publisher. It says the title of this anthology. It's a collection of some of the main people, by the way, who are slamming people like me or you by saying that we're conspiracy theorists, but who are making a pretty decent academic name for themselves by putting up BS, incomplete. I doubt if these people are even smart enough to come up with parallel constructions or outright lies. All they have to do is repeat in the giant echo chamber, and that's their truth, and it doesn't really matter beyond that so far as they're concerned. They go home and sleep at night. They could care less. They're like the civil servant job. They work for the Ministry of Truth, right? It's millennia. The title is, the main title is Contemporary Apocalyptic Movements. It's already being defined in a certain way for us. It's an apocalyptic movement. And yes, there is a chapter on Aum Shinrikyō. Here it's the last chapter. And I see, by all their bios that they come out of the social sciences, and which no one wants to enroll in. They want to be in the money areas. They want to take biology, IT, right? Something where there's a career path, a future, right? And by the way, that's also coming to an end because it's all going to be AI. So if you're in the STEM area, you better start thinking about Plan Bs, because it's not just your fraternity brother or sorority sister who's in sociology that's going to be out of work and having to work for a social justice organization funded by the Soros Foundation or the Rockefeller. It's not just going to be them who are going to be taking handouts from, but it's going to be you too, unless we get back to the type of political, economic, social, and cultural system that we, the people, want, right? We're not going to leave it to the quote unquote experts. Look what the experts have done for us here. Not that there are, you know what I mean. There's tons of good people out there too. I don't have to qualify my statement. Hey, but before I go on, I want to share with you some really compelling footage of Asahara Shoko. It's less than 60 seconds. So bear with me here. And you don't even have to understand Japanese. It's subtitled. Here we go, just to kind of take us back to 1995.
ガス出てるから。先ほどからですね、警視庁の車、そして救急車、消防車が行き交っております。
任意同行を求めるよう全国の警察本部に指示しました。
ただいま5時36分、電気カッターで、扉を切っています。
Okay, you probably caught that that watermark NHK, right? That's the quasi-governmental network in Japan, and it's well funded by the government. And I say quasi because it's also to a certain extent privately held. And the reason why that's important is because the NHK, along with the major outlets in Britain, in I guess Hong Kong was bought off to a certain extent, but definitely Britain and America, the news outlets were bribed to create a certain storyline, according to Yoichi Shimatsu, which I'll get to in a moment. And he would be in a very good position to have this sort of inside information because he was the English language editor of the Japan Times, which is the foremost English language daily newspaper in Japan. I mean, it's distributed everywhere, but it's edited and researched in Tokyo, where Yoichi Shimatsu lived for a number of years before he went to, well, I think he made stops in other places, but by the time I caught up with him a couple of years ago, he was in Nanjing, China. So I got to spend a week with him there in his own news operation and knew what happened. I mean, all hell broke loose. He left China and he's somewhere in the U.S. I don't know. I'll catch up with him here in America. He keeps on the run, and for good reason, which I'll get into in a moment. There are people that have been after him for any number of stories because that's the risk you run when you're a reporter. When you're a writer and you're writing the truth, you know, your ass is on the line, and a lot of people can't handle it. But I agree with Yoichi. You're going to die anyway, and your life is short, and you know, life is meant to pursue a truthful path, right? Anything less is not acceptable. For me, you know, I don't judge other people. I just care about, you know, my own conduct here. But I share the same philosophy. Now, the point I'm trying to make is I share the same philosophy as a Yoichi, and that's why I had to track him down. I've been reading all his articles for these years, and I knew he was over in, you know, in the general area that I was going to be. So I said I got to meet this guy, and it's one of the best professional meetings that I've had in my whole checkered career, being here and there. Okay, so let me just cut to the chase with these people. Read it if you're inclined, if you want to, but just, you know, with a large pillar of salt, read it, because their explanations fall short, way short. They say, well, Asahara was just pissed off that his organization didn't get a tax exempt status from the government, so he wanted to get revenge. Some people said that, you know, his business was failing, so he needed to do this to make a big smash to recruit more people into it, because he was selling his blood for $10,000, and he had these headsets, by the way, that he'd rent out to these groups, and these are all part of the sensationalist stories produced by NHK and repeated by CNN and the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post, and the Guardian, you know, and on and on. But he had these headsets, which to me, man, I think he was onto something. He was running them for the equivalent of about 10,000 American dollars a month. But I think he was onto something, because now the big technology is transcranial stimulation. Yeah, that's part of the whole neuroscience revolution. We're gonna be hooked up to our own little personal transcranial stimulation devices, right? So maybe he was testing them out for Nintendo or something. One of the video um, companies, the game companies, which I was going to talk about today, but I don't think I'm going to have time. Very quickly, I'll have to devote an entire talk to it. But my research has led me to tentatively suggest that the video game industry is not about PewDiePie or these guys who do these reaction videos on YouTube. Yeah, there's that, right? But the underlying reason is to workshop and gamify and to create scenarios for future attacks in Tokyo or wherever they are, or what's going on in Afghanistan right now was probably a video game somewhere, or maybe not released to the public necessarily, but it was already gamed. It's already been workshopped in as close to 3 dimensions as possible without actually going to Afghanistan, right? So these little areas here are distractions. They're pseudo explanations. I'm talking about the academic ones. I knew a guy in sociology who supposedly did an expose on the Guyana, and he's in this deal. He's in sociology, and these guys all knew about me because I was doing my thing and I was on the right track. And these were people who were mostly kind of like cover-up artists, right? There's this woman in the history department at UC Davis that I mentioned before that was doing this type of work too. So I was in the right place. By the way, I finally realized, and I knew this, but it finally struck me why UC Davis, because we think it's just like a low-tier UC, right? And maybe it is in terms of public awareness in the public. It's UC Berkeley or UCLA, right? But the reason why they were so vigilant about people like me is because in the UC system, there are only 2 nuclear reactors on campus, 2 campuses that have nuclear reactors, right? UC Berkeley, right? Berkeley, back then it was just called Berkeley because that was just there in UCLA, right? So there's one, the whole story, right? About Edward Teller and Lawrence Livermore and all those people. But the other one is, guess where? It's at UC Davis. And I said, of course, that's where Edward Teller was. No wonder they're so strict with me. Because if I was giving this type of talk over at UC Riverside, let's say out in the boonies, or even down at Santa Cruz, they was okay, just let them go. But at Davis, this is not going to fly. So I'm still learning what happened the after effects of this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Yoichi's comments here. And this can be, I'm going to post it to save you time, on my Patreon, so you can check out the whole article. It was published in March of 2020. 2020, March is when it all started to come down, right? There was a sea change, right? Let the games begin. This is when he was writing, and because Yoichi was making a comparison between what was happening, was being rolled out here in America and the world in March on a large scale. We know the timeline goes back, but in public awareness, it really started to hit in March 2020, and that's when the charrette was going on Mystery Island, right? So anyway, let me read a section from this incredible article, and it's the headline is, "The Tokyo subway gassing remains a media false narrative 25 years on," by Yoichi Shimatsu, exclusive to Rents, March 19, year 2020. On this 25th anniversary of the Tokyo subway gassing, the mainstream media and online news providers, are again running a disinformation operation in denial of, I'm not going to say the word, but it has a number in it, 19, being a bioterrorism weapon armed with HIV and tuberculosis for use against the CISM World Military Games held in Wuhan this past October. So yeah, Yoichi had figured out the CISM World Military, the Wuhan connection, very, very early on. Why? Because he was in China. He's got inside sources over there. or did, or maybe still does. I don't know. There's certain things he doesn't share with me, and I don't ask. But anyway, this is what's interesting. Well, there's many layers of interest here, but the main claim that the MSM, including NHK, you saw a clip there, and our press, right, the corporate press, is the false claim that they were using sarin gas in Tokyo, right? He says it was chlorine gas, and which is, bad enough as it is, and organophosphate farm chemicals. And these were the toxins dispersed against the underground train. Now, I won't go into why he comes to that conclusion, but it's a pretty good argument. But I don't necessarily rule out myself the use of sarin. But I do know that agricultural pesticides can kill people immediately or very quickly. Not like sarin. Sarin, you're going to be gone, which is one of the reasons why he claims that it wasn't sarin, because the rescuers would have been dead too, right? The would-be rescue, even if they had the hazmat suits on, some of them would have dropped dead. But so he's claiming that it's like these agricultural chemicals. And Japan, contrary to what you might think about them being all zenned out and eating macrobiotic food and brown rice, yeah, that's true. That's part of it. But it's also a pesticide country. It's food additives, the home of MSG. MSG was developed in the pre-war period to adulterate or to preserve foods for the imperial troops overseas, right? So they're very much part of the chemical complex, right? So, and then back in mid-March of 2020, he's saying, bringing in the group, South Korean Shincheonji, right? Terrorist cells nestled within Aum Shinrikyō, and now terrorist cells with the South Korean Shincheonji. And you want to talk about terrorist cells? Then let's not rule out the fact, because, we're all looking at, there's going to be these Afghans that are to come in, right? They're going to be exfiltrated and come into the U.S. and burrow in, and you've got your MS-13 Armada Salvatrucha, and you've got the Muslim Brotherhood. But what about Shincheonji? And of course, China, right? The China virus. We're looking for Iranians too. Yeah, that's part of the story, and I don't rule that out, by the way. But there's one element that we're missing. That's the South Korean terror cells that could be in the U.S. And that's not necessarily a knock on the wife of the governor of Maryland, but you all know that story, and it bears some deeper looking into. And that's one of the reasons why I'm giving this talk here, because I think the South Korean and the South and the North Korean connection are really missing in what we're seeing today, and Japan. We only know them through Kawaoka, but it goes much deeper than that. In fact, I should tell you right now, because I'm already running out of time, the deeper part of it goes far beyond Kawaoka, in that there's a faction. It's more than a faction. It's a fairly large entity of interlocking groups in Japan that never really left from, just like in the U.S., right? We have Nazis here. We have fascists. We have white Russian monarchists, right? And we have British monarchist type people. But in the case of Japan, there's a part of the mainstream government even, and these ministries, less so in literature. You don't get to see very many filmmakers or novelists get expression there. Usually they're liberal types, or anime now, manga has kind of sucked up the cultural energy there. But you do see them politically. And these are people who never got off the 1905, the Russo-Japanese War, which Japan won, but which astounded the entire world. What? Yellow people beating a European nation in a war? A naval battle, set pieces? That's crazy. But there's a group there that formed out of that ethos, actually further than that. When Japan went into the imperial emperor system for legitimacy, there was this group of, these are hereditary elite. They come out of the samurai class, they're and the banker class together, who go back, maybe in some cases hundreds of years. So they think Japan is their land, and they have an elaborate ideology and mythology behind it, and politics. Which, by the way, I'm not dismissing. These ideas we know by looking deeper and deeper into the House of Clockwork Orange Nassau, how multi-generationally these belief systems can play through and affect not just national but also global politics. So, but this is a stream that is not paid attention to in our research world, and I'm bringing it to here. But there's a group, and the prime minister, not the current one, but just I think the one before him, Abe Shinzo, is a multi-generational product of this system that I'm talking about, that goes back maybe 200 or 300 years, so far as their own family line, their lineage. And they keep it all documented, by the way. The document is called koseki. All Japanese families have koseki, and you're written in there. And so everybody knows about the begats, and they know about the bloodlines. Let's put it simple here. So what Shimatsu is, and by the way, Yoichi himself comes from one of these bloodlines in the southern extreme, not super extreme. I'm from extreme southern Japan, the Okinawa, and I'm from one of those. They weren't Japanese back then. They were just their own kingdom. But I come from one of those bloodlines. And Yoichi's family, who was Satsuma-cho, his bloodlines, they came and conquered my kingdom. So we're like hereditary enemies in a certain abstract way. But Yoichi himself comes from bloodline, and but his family were losers in this civil war, right? And the Abe family came out on top, and they're still running the show. So his argument is that in order for their flagging fortunes to be rescued, this is the LDP. In English, it's the Liberal Democratic Party. And by the way, the LDP was controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency, since the end of World War II. CIA, LDP, put it in your search engine. Japan is just not Atsugi Air Force Base and Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, that's one thin strand of a larger complex of New World Order, deep state history that I'm trying to bring in through cultural forensics to this larger discussion, because these are entities that have not been mentioned yet in the current crisis, this pestilence that we're dealing with. The Japan connection. So Abe, who was the prime minister recently, comes from that lineage, and Shimatsu is making the argument that they activated this synthetic new religion called Aum Shinrikyō, and of course all the sociologists and the psychologists provide them academic cover. Oh yeah, it's because of this, the modernization, or they're alienated from Japan, and Japan, blah, 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 all these pseudo explanations, mostly psychologistic and sociologistic and anthropologistic and scientistic. I add TIC that's a substitute for pseudo, right? Because there's some validity to all these different areas of inquiry, but a lot of it's garbage. So he's saying that this is the real reason why someone like Asahara was handpicked and put forward in order to create this huge worldwide sensation of gas bombing the storied Tokyo subway system. Incredible. All right. So Shimatsu asks us, right, the people who have learned a lot in the last 18 months and years before then, perhaps in some of our cases, right, to start informing the rest of the public that, hey, this is a formula, this is a story, this is like a romantic comedy, or it's like one of these old-fashioned westerns on TV, right? It's Gunsmoke, right? The ending and the formula, right? The beginning, middle, and the end is the same wherever you want to look at. The place, the location change, the characters change, but it's the same formula. Here's the formula. Oh, and I'm reading from Shimatsu. The Oklahoma City bombing and Tokyo subway gassing set the precedence for a spree of violent psyops, including the demolition of the World Trade Center, the subsequent anthrax letters, the false flag nerve gassings in Syria, and the ISIS decapitations. Here it is. The game plan, I call it the formula. The game plan is by now familiar. A repugnant slaughter is used to befuddle local police and blackmail the political class, causing the government to impose a self-protective media cover-up. The defensive posture enables a disgruntled elite faction to demand concessions, which are accorded in the panicked reaction. That's Big Pharma, by the way, right? They're holding us up. And if it's just extortion that we're dealing with, then I think our prospects are good. A lot of it is, I think, I'm seeing it's mostly extortion now. I thought it was deeper than that, which would really be a cause for concern, right? That they really, really are truly deep exterminationists. But if it's money, we can print it up and just hand it over to Pfizer or Moderna or J&J, whoever it is. The blame for such self-serving, cynical cruelty against innocent victims is then pinned on a convenient patsy groomed for the role of, quote, cultist madman, religious fanatic, or deranged lone gunman. It's all so predictable, yet the media keeps buying into the same charade over and over again, conspiring to deceive the more gullible and smug fools in the population. Well, I'm only a slight disagreement. I don't think the media keeps buying into it. I think the top level media managers know what's going down, right? They just hire some boob like Doniel Sullivan in order to be the mouthpiece of the story that they want told, right? So the top level, your Catherine Grahams, your Phil Graham, who was OSS, as you know, who committed suicide, right? That's what happens to these people. They all of a sudden they fall over and they hit their heads, right? Or they kill each other because, as one wag had it in the mafia, two people can keep a secret if one of them's dead. So anyway, an incredible storyline here. Okay, just to finish up, I got a few more minutes. Autobiographically, I was in Japan, 94, and I went to beautiful Kobe. It's a very foreign, it has a foreign ambience because a lot of foreign traders from Europe and other parts of Asia built homes there. And so you have these, let's say, British or Dutch style homes are made out of brick, which doesn't make any sense in Japan, which is a, sort of a tropical, humid climate. But they wanted their brick homes that reminded them of London or the suburbs or the countryside. So Kobe, I've spent a lot of time there. And Abe, the former prime minister, was part of the Kobe Steel's research and development. And they had an earthquake. The year I left, in 94 and 95, they had an earthquake. Then they had or maybe I got the sequence wrong, but then they had the Aum Shinrikyō event. And what happened is that, according to Shimatsu here, and we have to even cross-check his work, right? Not that I'm, I don't disbelieve him, but, good research requires checking and checking, double-checking, and cross-checking, and double-checking. So according to him, Abe hired this brilliant astrophysicist who had an IQ higher than Albert Einstein's. He says a 220 plus range. I don't know if that's even possible, but let's say a high IQ. His name was Murai. So we know this is not a BS story. He's got a name attached to it. Murai Hideo, an astrophysicist, and he's claiming that this Kobe earthquake, look on your favorite YouTube channel and look at the Kobe earthquake of 95 just to get an idea of the energy that was built up and expelled at that time. And you can, while you're at it, check out the Fukushima, because I think it was a similar technology, although Shimatsu doesn't go there. I'm taking you in that direction. But anyway, the point is that the earthquake was created, according to Shimatsu, by an EM, electromagnetic energy blaster, capable of triggering earthquakes, as happened in Kobe in early 1995, according to Murai, this astrophysicist, who was in turn, I told you it always ends bad for these people. Murai himself was killed right on the evening news live by a contract killer. He had a big, super sharp, well, it's a redundancy. It's a sushi knife, and they disemboweled him right on live television, which, by the way, is part of the strategy to scare the hell out of everybody. They knew, they set him up, and they got, and the guy was Korean too. He was a Korean gangster. But most of Yakuza, by the way, are ethnic Koreans, right? They're not Japanese, they're Koreans. That's why I say this whole idea of Korea hates Japan, Japan is just another studio concoction. And that's why I say that, hey, while we're looking at Sina Bavad, well, you know, these people of certain ethnicities, right? I think the South Korean and North Korean because they're the same too. They're pretending to be divided, but they're at the top level. They're working together. That has to be checked out in today's situation. You know, I won't call it a pandemic or pandemic. I'll call it the pestilence, the great pestilential attack on America, circa 2020, 2021. We're going to pull out of this fairly soon, because the weight of these stories and this information, and most of all, the defections, and as people figure out that, hey, I might be going to a press conference and someone's going to jump out of the crowd and disembowel me with a very sharp sushi knife. And it's not going to be Anthony Bourdain. And Anthony Bourdain is another example of someone who's rolled up, right? He committed suicide. I mean, stories. After a while, these people are going to break it down, put it together, and say, hey, I'm out, you know, count me out. And then the horns will be pulled back and we'll be able to relax a little bit, but not totally, because it's war, right? It's war, constant war. I always have my Japanese shillelagh within arm's reach. I'm never more than a step away from the Japanese shillelagh, okay? But that's just to remind me that you never let down, and you are constantly not on the defensive necessarily, but you're always constantly vigilant. And then the true war, the true battle that's won, is where you don't have to fight, right? That's in Chinese, it's called wushu, which means not to fight or stop fighting. Which, by the way, went to my part of the world, Okinawa, the Ryukyu Islands. Right, and they call that kobudo. It's the same Chinese characters, right? So this is part of my legacy. This is part of my heritage. It's a little bit autobiography mixed in with what's going down today in 2021. And every one of you in the chat room, and those of you who are listening in the recorded version, you have the same story and the same heritage. You just haven't discovered it yet, and probably no one ever gave you the idea that your background, your heritage intersects with these larger currents of world crises and peace as well. So I'm telling you that. So you go ahead and research it, and you'll be so gratified. I mean, look at John O'Loughlin. We've been following his story for a long time, and we were seeing these revelations in real time, TDY. I mean, do I have to go through examples? And it comes out with a book. Okay, that's not a one-off. That's every one of you here in the chat room. That's me. That's everybody who's listening to that. If everybody does a little bit of that and intersects with it, man, we're going to get out of this crisis even quicker than I think will happen, because there's a two-way motion. We're rising, right? We're going up because we have the self-knowledge. We're looking at our bloodlines. We're discovering the shillelagh heritage and all of our backgrounds. That's going up. And the other ones are going down because they're getting sliced up with sushi knives. So anyway, I don't want to leave on such a violent image than that, because I am a man of peace. I want peace, and you fight so that you can have peace, right? That's the word on the street, at least. That's how I came up. All right, and it's worked so far. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for indulging me. I'll see you on Thursday. Yeah, we got the doubleheader. Thank you very much. Bye.